This week on Quadriga, Germany's refugee crisis. Has the mood turned ugly? The anti-foreigner Pegida movement is 1 year old, and thousands of its supporters held a rally in Dresden. The refugee crisis has given Pegida a boost. Speakers vilified migrants, politicians, and journalists. Such words are being followed by deeds. Activists and politicians are targets of threats and violence by right-wing extremists, like the knife attack on a politician in Cologne. Is the mood in Germany at a tipping point? Is the government responsive enough to the danger from the far right? Coming to you from Berlin, Quadriga, the international debate. Your host this week, Melinda Crane.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga. Just a few weeks ago, Germany was celebrating its Willkommenskultur, its culture of welcome for migrants. Is that already at an end? That's what we want to talk about today with three people who've been following the refugee story closely. It's a pleasure to welcome Alan Posener. He's a German-British author and a political commentator for the daily Die Welt. He says Germany's becoming a normal European country with populist parties on the left and the right. There's no reason to panic. American journalist Erik Kirschbaum works for the Reuters news agency in Berlin and is an author of a number of books about Germany. He says the world is looking on Germany with respect and admiration, and so far the government has done a terrific job of striking the right balance. And our third guest today, a warm welcome to Hungarian-born reporter Frenyó. She works for the German television network ARD and lives between Berlin, Budapest and Paris. She says pressure's growing, but the basic mood won't shift. Whoever's been against welcoming refugees will still be against it, and who's been welcoming them will keep on trying to help. So, Alan Posener, you said in your opening statement, Germany's simply becoming a normal country. But knife attacks against politicians are hardly normalcy, either here or in most other countries. Last week's Pegida demonstration featured a mock gallows with reserved places for Chancellor Merkel and her finance minister. Is there truly no cause for alarm?
Well, I think you have to differentiate between gallows, and knife attacks. It's one thing to sort of say death to whatever and have a picture of a gallows, and it's another thing to really actually attack someone. There is a difference between words and deeds, and actually much worse than the knife attack is the over 400 attacks on refugee asylum centres there have been and homes and so on in this year alone. So there is a small, very small group of people who are obviously willing to use violence to further their nefarious ends, but you have to differentiate that from people who might go slightly overboard in their criticism of the political system. I mean, that's very important. Words and deeds, there's a difference.
Frenyó, Alan Posener just mentioned attacks on refugee shelters and on refugees themselves. In fact, the New York Times is reporting that there have been more such attacks in Germany than in any other country in Europe. When you look at the situation and the mood here now in Germany, how would you compare it, for example, to Hungary, where you spend a good deal of time and whose politicians certainly have not minced words when it comes to opposing the migration?
The situation is definitely alarming in Hungary as well as in Germany. I think it's worse in Hungary just because of the political situation. However, I think we have to take words very seriously because they are paving the way to deeds.
In other words, you would say a knife attack like the one on the politician in Cologne who was running for mayor but previously had been in charge of social welfare matters in Cologne and therefore also of refugees. You would say words paved the way for that knife attack?
Yeah, definitely. And this might just be the beginning.
Erik Kirschbaum, your opening statement says the government's doing a terrific job of striking the balance, but isn't its open-armed welcome of refugees what is provoking this wave of fear, and that fear, of course, inciting violence?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no easy answer to the problem. It's a massive problem. Germany is taking, maybe 1.5 million refugees in this year. It's a huge number. There's going to be tension. There's going to be problems. But if you look at the view from outside of Germany, I think the world is looking on at fascination at the job Germany is doing. The rest of the EU is falling down, dropping the ball, and Germany is carrying the load here. And there's going to be tension, there's going to be conflicts, but it's a very open society, Germany, and a knife attack, as appalling as it is, if there's this much tension going on, things like that will happen, but just stay calm about it. And Germany's doing the right thing. This guy has been arrested, he's being prosecuted. The state, based on the rule of law, is functioning. Just stay calm, it's working.
Let's take a closer look, perhaps, at the climate of fear that surrounds Pegida. We saw images in our opening video of the demonstrations there in Dresden this past Monday evening. Much of the attention on that evening focused on one speaker. He's a writer called Akif Pirinci, who attacked Germany's politicians for their handling of the refugee crisis, thereby prompting chants of resistance amongst the crowd. And then he had this to say.
There are alternatives, but unfortunately the concentration camps are not in operation at the moment.
So there are alternatives, but the concentration camps are unfortunately not in operation at the moment. Those were his words. It was not clear whether the target of that was meant to be migrants themselves or German politicians, whether he was suggesting that perhaps they, in fact, should be those who should be sent to concentration camps. But the fact is, any mention of concentration camps in this country, Alan Posener, is deeply shocking. Would you say, when you hear speech like that at a Pegida rally, that the tone has changed?
Look, he's been quoted wrongly. I mean, Akif Pirinci is just a horrible, horrible person, a very bad writer, right? Which I think is much worse than anything he says politically. But apart from that, he was quoted wrongly. What he said was, the government wants to deal with us, the opposition, but unfortunately for them, they don't have concentration camps anymore. So he was suggesting that if the government had their way, they would put Pegida in a concentration camp, or anyone who is radically opposed to their policy. Now, this is just stupid and bullshit, and he was actually shouted down for that. But he was misquoted in the media as saying that somehow refugees should be put in concentration camps. And if we do this kind of thing, us journalists, then, of course, we're feeding the suspicion that mainstream media are misquoting, that we are what they call the lying press. So let's be careful about this. He said a very stupid thing. He said something which is absolutely wrong. No one's going to put Pegida in concentration camps. But, he didn't say, let's put refugees in concentration camps. Let's make that clear.
Speaking of resentment of the media, the lying press, as they are often called, one of our DW colleagues was attacked at this Monday's rally. Violence against him, literally beaten. And Frenyó, what accounts for the hatred and the resentment of the media?
Well, I saw the same thing happening in Hungary as well. I think a lot of people, associate media with the ones who brought in this refugee crisis. They were the ones transmitting the words of Chancellor Merkel, "You're all welcome." So if they are afraid and they see this as a plague, what is happening these days, then who should they make responsible for this? Media is a good scapegoat.
So suggesting that the media are part of the political elite, Erik Kirschbaum. Now, from the start, I know that you also have reported on Pegida extensively since it was founded a year ago. It was seen initially as a movement of disaffection, a kind of a diffuse movement without clear political aims. Would you say that that is changing? Has the movement become radicalized?
It's more radical, but it was fading away there about 6 months ago. Hardly anybody wrote about Pegida anymore. It was a damp squib. It seemed to had gone past its heyday, and now it's getting a resurgence. But just remember, this is, 20,000 people in a country of 80 million people. It's still a small group of people, a splinter group of people in one part of East Germany. It never caught on anywhere else. Just stay relaxed about it. It's a small group of people. There's counter demonstrations in Dresden as well that are just as big. Pegida is not a threat to the Constitution. It's not a threat to democracy in Germany. Sometimes it seems just just get a little bit overheated here to think that Pegida is about to take over control of the government. It's not. It's a small splinter group.
Stay relaxed, but if you're a journalist, then you'd better hide your address, you know? Don't make it public.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in Dresden as well, and I get uncomfortable. I get creepy feeling when they start shouting Lügenpresse. It's definitely not, you know, what's wrong with these people? Can't they deal with the press in a normal way? But it's just a small group.
German Interior Minister said this week that the Pegida is being led by hard right-wing extremists, Alan Posener, and said that the government absolutely has his eye on the movement. Would you say that it is a clear political movement with a clear political agenda?
Well, it certainly didn't start that way. But, you know, Pegida, you know, if you look at what they say they're patriotic Europeans against the Islamization of European culture. That's what their name means. So there's this word Islamization. And to my mind, that is a clear signal word, which means the government is in cahoots with all sorts of Islamic forces to Islamize our country. And this, of course, is a clear ideology, in fact. It's a right-wing ideology which suggests that somehow the other is about to take over our culture. Now, we had this in the 30s against the Jews, who were seen as the other, which, you know, were going to take over the Jewish Republic of Weimar. But it remains the fact that there are at most 20,000 of them, whereas in Weimar there were millions. So I mean, these people are bad, but they're not dangerous yet.
Prosecutors, Anna Frenyó, are looking into whether they ought to be moving against some of the inciters there at these rallies, including possibly the author we heard from just a moment ago, on charges of hate speech. Do you think it's time for the law to step in here?
Well, in this country, things like this are taken very seriously. So, yes, there are certain things you cannot say in Germany, whereas in France or in England, maybe you'd be all right with that. I don't necessarily think it's a good way to prosecute these people because you're going to feed more hatred with that. I think it makes more sense if you try to speak to them and understand their fears and try to, you know, explain the situation to their followers.
Erik Kirschbaum, Germans, of course, take a different view of hate speech in some cases than Anglo-Saxon legal culture tends to do. We put freedom of opinion often in Anglo-Saxon legal culture at the very top, and many Germans would say actually respect for human value should be higher. What do you think? Should this sort of speech be prosecuted?
Yeah, I mean, that's the German way of doing it. When somebody says something like that, they get prosecuted, they get into trouble. But in the United States, freedom of speech is a very important aspect. And so, yeah, I mean, I think when the far right people open their mouths and start talking, people see how disqualified they are and how ludicrous they are. So let them say what they say and let the people decide. I think most educated people in Germany know enough about their own history to realize, oh no, these people are really from another planet.
But Alan Posener, if we agree that to some degree at least words can inspire deeds, and in a country like Germany that certainly has had a neo-Nazi movement, we know the crimes of the NSU in the eastern part of Germany, where Pegida is also based, 10 years of murdering people of migration background with impunity. Should we not be concerned about what kind of damage speech like this can do?
Yes, we should. We should definitely be, you know, be talking with these people and showing how foolish and evil that kind of speech is. But we shouldn't be prosecuting it. On a personal level, I used to be a communist when I was a young man, you know, and we shouted death to U.S. imperialism, and Willy Brandt is a traitor to whatever, and you know, and I didn't get prosecuted for that. I got prosecuted for hitting policemen, and I think that's perfectly right. You know, looking back, they definitely prosecuted me for the right reason, and I think the way West Germany was relaxed in that respect, although we had a very active terrorist movement, the RAF. which killed people all over the place and which used the same vocabulary. You know, we managed to differentiate then, and I'm thankful for that, and we should differentiate now.
I mean, the words of Pegida, people, I think most people realize you can forget about them, but what's more dangerous is when politicians and parties like the CSU start talking about things like that, start complaining about the numbers of refugees coming. That's more dangerous. That's when you reach the middle class. That's when you reach a lot of people. And those words from people like that worry me a lot more than what people say at a Pegida rally.
And we are hearing some words from the Chancellor's political party. Anna Frenyó, the Chancellor had a very unpleasant meeting with delegates of her party in an eastern town called Schkeuditz, where several of them suggested she ought to be stepping down. Does that show that concern about the tide of migration is rising also within the wider population? Both Alan Posener and Erik Kirschbaum have said, look, this is confined to a very small movement. In fact, we have seen mainstream members of the Chancellor's own party questioning whether the course is the right one.
Right, I think the Chancellor is doing exactly the right thing. Her party is turning against her. A lot of people are turning against her. But the only humane thing that could be done is exactly what she is doing. And she has her line, and she is, taking it through. As a Hungarian and having met refugees, I see people in front of my eyes. So the only thing you can do if you're a politician of Germany, if you're the leader of Germany, is to try to help as many as possible. Now, of course, this means stepping out of our comfort zones for everybody in Europe. It's not easy, but she is doing exactly the right thing, and it's a natural reaction that, people start not liking her.
Alan Posener, what do you think? Could opposition within her own ranks actually wind up bringing the Chancellor down?
Yes. And it's not just migration. This is just sort of the last straw that broke the camel's back, the camel being her own party, the conservative CDU. She has led the CDU in places they never thought they'd go, recognising gay rights, recognising Germany as a country of immigration, abolishing nuclear power, abolishing the draft for the military, and all sorts of things. And they've been unhappy with this for a long time. And now finally they've got a handle where, the right-wingers in her party have got a handle to bring her down. And they may succeed. But you know what? That might be a good thing. Quite frankly, Germany lacks a true right-wing party. Every democracy needs, a decision, a rift in the middle between the left and the right. And this hasn't happened. We've had a grand coalition in Germany for so many years that Parliament is becoming irrelevant because there's no discussion there. So if that's what it takes to bring Germany back to a parliamentary democracy where there's left and right and fighting each other, so be it.
But Kirschbaum, doesn't Germany have a right-wing populist party in the form of the Christian Social Union, the Bavarian sister party of the CDU? From what we hear here amongst the press here in the capital city, Berlin, there's quite a rift between the two sister parties at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in the Grand Coalition, the CSU was a bit irrelevant, and now the CSU does have an issue where they can get their name back into the paper and back into the media, and it's definitely a problem for Merkel, but her popularity is still really, really high. And I don't see her in as much trouble as you do. I think she's committed and she's on this course, and this is a rare chance in the 10 years of Merkel where she's really been ahead of the wave, where she's showing real leadership. Usually she leads from behind, waits to see what everybody else is doing, and here she's showing real leadership. I think she's going to come out looking really strong for this. I think the world outside is looking at Merkel with a lot of admiration and fascination for her leadership in this. The rest of the EU is just hoping the problem is going to go away. And here she is showing leadership. And I get the feeling with Merkel, if this is the end of her chancellery, that's the way it is. She's not going to change course now. She's determined and committed. I mean, honestly, I've been away from Germany for a few weeks now. When I left, the mood here was really optimistic and really buoyant about this. What a great thing. And it just surprises me in a way to see that the mood has turned so dark so quickly. But I guess that's the German way of jumping on a problem.
The government has now passed a major revision to its asylum laws. Let's take a look at that. Many people are saying it could represent the first step toward capitulation toward the hate and fear-mongers.
Border fences and barbed wire against people seeking refuge in Europe. Could these images from Hungary soon become reality in Germany too? Angela Merkel meeting with refugees. The Chancellor has repeatedly advocated a culture of welcome. But it's received a damper. German lawmakers approved measures to tighten asylum rules. Now, asylum seekers are to receive goods like clothes and food instead of cash. Migrants who are unlikely to be granted asylum can be deported more quickly. Politicians from Merkel's governing coalition want to set up special transit zones at the frontier. And the police union is already calling for a fence along Germany's border to keep refugees out.
Anna Frenyó, you do often commute back and forth between Berlin and Budapest. Budapest, Hungary, of course, has now built some walls. The Chancellor keeps telling us walls are not the answer. How are those walls working out for Hungary?
They definitely do work out, and the plan of President Orbán has worked perfectly. We have practically no immigrants left in Hungary, no refugees. We do have 700 in prison who are waiting for, being sent out of the country. And yeah, the problem has been solved. Has the problem been solved? I met these refugees Friday evening at the Hungarian-Croatian border. This was the last train that came through Hungary to the Austrian border. Now these people are going through Croatia and Slovenia. They're still out there. They're still, in the rain, still mothers and children. What has this solved?
Alan Posener, if Europe does not work together to find a joint solution for the refugee crisis, and at this point we still don't see much sign of one, won't Germany eventually have to go in the direction that Hungary has taken? In other words, simply shut its borders?
Well, that would be a catastrophe, wouldn't it? We have, within the so-called Schengen zone in Europe...
The zone of free travel.
Free travel. You pass across the borders if it wasn't there. You don't need a passport. My daughter's just in Poland. She forgot her passport. Nobody cared because nobody looked. And this is something incredible, something that's never been there in Europe before. We want to protect that. But if we want to protect that, we do have to protect our outer borders. And in a way, Mr. Orbán, though he's not a very nice, savoury person, was right in saying, well, by keeping these people out of Hungary, I'm keeping them away from you, I'm keeping them away from Schengen. The only problem is he's not, because they're going through Croatia and so on. But we do have to protect Europe's outer borders. And yes, Europe has to work together to do that. And I hope that's going to happen, because otherwise to descend into the nationalism of old would be a catastrophe, the end of a dream.
Erik Kirschbaum, the government's hoping that with this new asylum law and the measures that it imposes, essentially the strictures, the limits, that the flow of migrants will slow down. Do you think that will really be the case? Will it make much of a difference?
That's hard to say, but I think they are doing the right things, taking some small steps by using military planes to send rejected asylum seekers back to Albania, wherever they've come from. So I think they are trying to keep the people in Germany pacified, if you will. And I think a lot of people in Germany don't have a problem with war refugees. Germany has a whole war history themselves. They appreciate refugees fleeing wars. They have a problem with the economic refugees from the Balkans. So I think if the government can succeed in maybe taking some of the tension out of the refugee situation by repatriating others who don't really deserve or aren't going to get it more quickly, I think that will pacify the population a bit as well.
Anna Frenyó, do you really think that this new asylum law represents a break with the Willkommenskultur and with the idea that migrants with a legitimate claim do deserve refuge?
I think the climate is definitely turning in a way. There has to be, or it turns out there has to be a certain upper limit, how many people can Germany welcome. But what I also see is there's a lot of hypocrisy in this whole business, which I see in Germany and in France as well. Did you know that from the Calais refugee camp, it's called Jungle, government spends 15,000 euros per immigrant to take them by private jets to refugee centres, and from there they just walk back to this camp. So, what are we actually doing here? These are people whose lives we are juggling around with. Every step will be welcome, which will, give a hope to end the influx of more people.
Alan Posener, our title asks whether the mood has turned ugly on the basis of the new asylum law, on the basis of what you're hearing at demonstrations like the ones in Dresden. Would you answer that with a yes?
No, it's turned realistic, and that's a good thing.
Okay. Many thanks. Many thanks to all of you for being with us today, and thanks to all of you out there for tuning in. See you soon.